Richey from New York, and also Will Offs from New York City will be the second speaker. And it's my pleasure to introduce Eric. Eric was an undergraduate here. He graduated from Georgia Tech in 1993 with his Bachelor of Science, and he was the CRS Serine Architecture Scholarship recipient. He went to Paris, participated in our Paris program in 1992, and received his master's degree here in 1996. And I'm proud to say he was my student in the first master's project studio in 1994? No.
96.
96, within the last year. And he won first place in then what was called the Southern GF Prize. And I'll have to tell you a little story. When Eric was a student in the Master's Project Studio, we had the studio in what's now the Stubbins Gallery, and we were on the quarter system. So Eric was finishing the studio in late May. Is that about right? There was no air conditioning, and we weren't drawing on computers, so everybody had vellums and tracing paper, and you would leave and you would come back, and the tracing paper and the vellum would be all wrinkled, and everybody was sweating on their drawings. But Eric did a magnificent project, and I wish you had some images of that to show us today. And then he went to New York City and worked for Richard Meier for 3 years, and for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill before working for Thomas Phifer Architects for 10 years. And he was a project architect for some of Phifer's really, really terrific projects, especially those on the Rice University campus, which he'll show us. So, Eric, we're pleased to have you back. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Charles. I'll exchange another story. When I was a student of Charles, he gave me some of the best advice that I've ever had. He said, do a beautiful drawing every day. And I think that it's kind of a philosophy that applies, that when you get in a jam or you're trying to figure something out, sometimes it's better just to roll out a piece of paper or get in the computer and just kind of do a drawing. And sometimes you can work through that stuff. It's on? Okay. So thank you for that, Charles. If I speak too lowly, just let me know and I can turn up the volume. But as I said, it's an honor to be here, and I'm an architect in Brooklyn. I just started my own office about 1.5 years ago, and I've been working on a variety of projects in New York, and I'll get to those a little bit later in the lecture. But I thought it would be beneficial to talk about some of the work that I did with Tom Phifer, and then there's a few projects that I did kind of with Tom Phifer after I left his office. So I'll show 1 or 2 of those projects, and then I'll finish up with a couple of projects that I'm currently working on. Tom Phifer was a mentor to me. I was in his office for a long time, and he's a really great person. So as a lead up to his lecture, I believe it's on November the 4th, I encourage everybody in this room to go see the lecture. It should be really good. So what I've been doing, oddly enough, I've been involved with architecture schools after I left architecture school for a couple of projects. So this is the architecture addition at Clemson University, and I'm currently working on a project with the GSD. So even though I graduated back in '96, I'm still kind of, it's interesting to work with architects after I've left the academic part of it. I grew up about 30 miles from Lee Hall, which is the architecture addition at Clemson, and it was basically done because the school was overcrowded. They absolutely had to do the addition, and it came at a perfect time in the economy because it was 2008, 2009, and it was great. One of the key members of the project was the president of Clemson University, who was an architect He went to school at Clemson University, and he was a major advocate for the project. There was also two professors who people may know, John Jackson, Jim London, who were senior professors at Clemson, who really helped this project get to the completion. This is elevation, as every project on Clemson's campus has to have what's called Clemson brick. So we did a very monolithic detailing of the project on two facades, the east and west facade, that were solid, and then we punched big openings where the studios were. This is the art studio. And Clemson's an interesting place. It's almost more so than Georgia Tech in the sense that they like to make things and they make big mock-ups. And I think that a lot of architecture schools are doing that now, but it seems like Clemson's always kind of making things. And I'll show you a slide in a second that shows a space where these kind of fabrications occur. This is an image from the architecture chair's office. She's Kate Swinson, and she just started the year we finished the project, and her office is visible from different aspects of the building. And I think it's interesting because you feel, I think as a student, you feel really connected to the school because you see her working in her office, and I think she similarly feels the same way. The column, the structure for the building is in the center of the space, and one of the early things that we were thinking about was the Bibliothèque Nationale. I know that image probably seared in everybody's memory of the kind of looking inside the gallery space, and you see these slender columns come down and these kind of vaulted skylights. So that was one of the precedent images that we started looking at early on in the project, and as we started to develop it, we put a skylight over the column. And this is the campus plan, and our project was down on the southern end of the campus. And when we started the project, it was kind of an extension to Clemson's campus. So the plan is that this architecture school, which is this building here that you just saw in the slides, would become a precinct down below that would have more buildings. And the initial master planning schemes that we saw tried to elevate that building so that it would be at the elevation, the ground plane elevation of all the other buildings that were part of the original fabric of the campus. We made the decision early on that it should be kind of down low and at the elevation that's common where the building is, and made that the main level. And we also felt like that this kind of interstitial space between the existing architecture building and the new architecture building, the red zone that you see in the plan, would be kind of a place for fabrication, almost like an outdoor fabrication studio. And it actually functions like that today. This is a plan, the area where the yellow lines are shows the architecture building, the existing architecture building, and the plan down below shows the new architecture building. And what's interesting about the two buildings, and what we tried to do differently, was that the old architecture building had office spaces that were kind of segregated from the studio spaces. So there wasn't this kind of connection between the two. And what we tried to do in the new addition was kind of link all of that together. So office spaces are inside of studio spaces, classrooms are next to offices, so it's all mixed together. And what's interesting about Clemson is all of their majors are very collaborative. They all get along together. Landscape architects get along with, it's a very collegial atmosphere. The second floor of the building is a mezzanine, and that allows us to kind of do the Swiss cheese thing where you can get large openings. And this was very important to the concept that you could see down into the studio spaces. There's studio trays up on this level. And because it was less than 50%, we were able to include it as a mezzanine, and it helped us from a lot of code standpoints. What President Barker and the kind of the focus from the beginning of the project was that everything on the project had to have meaning. It had to mean something. It had to be a building that teaches. And so from the beginning of the project, we started looking at different sustainable strategies. One was a green roof, one was rainwater retention, one was solar panels, one was radiant heating and cooling, daylighting, and we didn't really know how to do that in an architecture building. And I think, everybody's figuring this out, I think, at the same time. But we worked with a company called Trans Solar, and they are based in Stuttgart, and they're phenomenal at doing all the analysis and kind of guiding you on sustainable systems. This diagram is just meant to show the kind of how we felt like in architecture schools that there's teaching that occurs or there's learning that occurs outside of your specific studio that you're in. You might get up from your desk and go look at what a fourth year student's doing if you're a sophomore. And we thought that this kind of learning where it's not so structured is as valuable as the structured learning that you learn in architecture school. These are further development of the sustainable diagrams that we did. We were, I want to say, one of the first buildings in the Southeast that did radiant cooling. There was a big, everybody was very fearful about condensation forming on the slab in the Southeast. So we had to go out and find examples of where this occurred. The university tasked us with that because they wanted to make sure that they weren't doing something that would future a problem. And it was an interesting process. We found somebody in Tennessee, in Chattanooga, who was a mechanical engineer, and he had done radiant heating. And he said, well, I've got the pipes in place. I'm going to cool it during the summer months. And kind of intuitively, he figured out how to make it work. And I think he was one of the first examples in the Southeast. As we got past the kind of initial sustainable diagrams, we started working on more developed diagrams. This is a systems diagram for underslab ductwork. This is a radiant zoning layout where we started to lay out the power grids and requirements. We started looking at sprinkler layout and distribution aligned with lighting. This is the mezzanine. This is the radiant profile. Duct distribution on top of the offices on the mezzanine level. And then this is a reflected ceiling plan with all the skylights and the sprinkler layout. And so we got into construction, and one of the complexities of the project, which is that on the right-hand side of this photograph, there's a ravine. It's a natural formation of rocks. And the building had to be slightly distorted on that side so that we could get as close to the ravine as possible and at the same time kind of stay out of the natural landscape form. So what that meant is that the roof got warped. So this facade, where you see the high point of the curve, it's in the middle on the north side of the elevation, but it's on the kind of preference to the right-hand side on the south elevation. And it means that all of the column trees in the building, the arms are slightly different. So the process of going through the shop drawings and making sure everything was kind of very particular in terms of the geometry was difficult, but we made a formula and it applied to every column tree. You can see here that we had to coordinate where the sprinkler lines were going through the beam on the side of the column tree. And this is one of the column trees going in. They were full welded, full penetration welds around the perimeter of the column tree, and it took the guy a day to do each column tree. So it was 50 days from start to finish. And what's interesting, I think, from a design perspective, was that the column is it's centered in the middle of the studio. So the column isn't hidden over in the wall or off to the side somewhere. It comes right down in the middle of the studio space, and you sit right next to the column. And I think it's a very kind of a powerful thing in the space. The frame was delicate. At the end of the building, we had the brick wall cantilevered for about 15, 20 feet. And we had these delicate Y columns that went on the north and south facades that were kind of part of the sunshade structure. And this is the radiant heating and cooling system in place. And we had to bring all the pipes up into manifolds that were hidden in closets and office spaces and classrooms. This is the facade, and it had natural ventilation was a big part of our strategy for keeping the energy usage down. And it's interesting, like today, I mean, there's certain times during the year where you can basically cut the mechanical system off. The top windows are motorized, they open, and then it's, there's a light that comes on and tells the students that they can open the windows on the ground floor. And so when the mechanical system shuts off, the building's completely naturally ventilated. The motorized windows also, I think, do nighttime flushing, so you can flush the building out at night, and that helps from an energy perspective. One very important thing I learned in the process was that brick often matches the color of the soil where you're doing it. So orange clay in South Carolina and the brick, what is affectionately termed the Clemson brick, is the same color. We did a lot of coordination. The project was very tight from a layout perspective, and these are underground ducts that provide distribution through the space. This is the Brockstein Pavilion at Rice University, and the donor for that project was Raymond Brockstein, one of the great patrons in Houston. Houston's an interesting place. There's a lot of people who are contemporary art. There's a lot of patrons, a lot of people, buyers for contemporary art down there, and he donated this building to Rice University because he was a student there. He was an architecture student there, and I think he's a second generation or third generation mill worker. And his dad owned, his daughter is running the company, but it's one of the best millworking companies I think in the country. But he's a staunch modernist, and he asked us to do this project on Rice University's campus. And at the time, Rice University is, Charles, and you know this, it's a beautiful, beautiful campus. It's got beautiful trees, but the buildings are very traditional, and Michael Graves did the master plan. And so this was a bit outside the normal. But what was interesting about the project was that all the buildings on the campus being brick, they all were kind of inward looking. The Rice University is on the college system, so once you join a college, you stay in that college for your time at Rice. And what was happening is people would go off into their colleges and not meet other people, and there was not that ability to learn through informal interactions. So what Raymond Brockstein wanted this to be was a place that people could come from all colleges, have coffee, talk about things, and it's functioning very much that way. It's in the central quad at Rice University, and the central quad was kind of a leftover space when we started the project, but we tried to maintain the pathways. So this building's fits inside the natural pathways for the quad, and it's meant to be kind of an open thing that pulls people in. We worked with the office of James Burnett and as a landscape architects, and they were they did a great job. These Drake elms are popular, and it's funny, just by shading the space, people can sit outside, I wouldn't say year round, but for the majority of the year. And the fountain actually helps cooling the space. This is a site plan. As you can see, the Fondren Library is to the right, and the Student Center's up on the top left-hand side. And there's a cow path that goes on the south side of the building, but otherwise it's a very formal kind of college plan. Yes. It's right here. But I don't think it's wrong the way the drawing shown, where it's solid things, because it's a very kind of block type of thing. But so what we tried to do was make this place where people come together be as open as possible. We tried to reach out to the live oaks in the space. We also added doors that could open and allow natural ventilation to come through the space. and added this huge trellis that's about 20 feet around the perimeter of the building so that it controlled daylight coming into the space. We worked very hard to organize the systems. The sprinklers were on the beams, the conduit was on the beams. These skylights occurred between the beams, so it was a very rigorous effort to get everything aligned on the project. And this was the trellis. The company who did it down in Houston's a very small company, and the fabricator recently passed away, but he was one of the instrumental players on the project. This is just an example of the roof drainage. It had to be very tight to the beams as it came in to miss the skylights. And then I would say that this project, more than most, the subcontractors really bought into the project. They bought into what we were doing, and they call Houston the can-do capital of the world. They were really nice. Really easy to work with down there. That project led to the James Turrell Sky Space down in Houston, which is on the other side of the quad. And if you're a student and you don't know who James Turrell is, it's probably good to do a little bit of research on him. He's a phenomenal artist, and he does a few different types of art installations, art pieces, but this is one series of art installations that he does, which are called Sky Spaces. And they started out as very small things. When I say small, he proposed a Sky Space for Rice University for Dominique de Menil that was a plywood structure, and only 2 or 3 people could be in there, and that was back in '72. And as patrons became bigger and funding became bigger, it grew to be, this was the 72nd Sky Space, and I think he's going to stop doing Sky Spaces when it gets to 100. But they're just progressively getting larger and bigger. But in theory, what happens in the Sky Space is that lights shine on the underside of the surface. There's a hole cut in the center of the ceiling, and the light dims to a certain level. So at dusk and at daylight, that's really the only times to view the Sky Space, when the light in the atmosphere gets to a certain kind of a dim lighting level, and the light on the underside of the Sky Space gets to be that same level, you reach something called a flash point, which is where your eyes, it's an amazing thing, but as you look through the hole or the oculus in the roof, you can see the colors of the sky are rich blue, or they can be green, or they can be purple, and then you look out to the side and you're like, that's not right because the sky's blue. But it's the perception of seeing yellow light on the ceiling with the sky in the hole. It's a phenomenal experience, and it's very hard to describe in words without seeing the project. Obviously, the architecture for a Sky Space has to be absolutely minimal and no joints. Probably a good time to pause. I'm proud of the three projects I just showed. People have been married in all 3. And the Sky Space is, I think it's the top 5 or top 10 date spots in Houston. People take girlfriends there, or boyfriends there, and I'm very proud that it's the backdrop. This is a drawing just showing, as it looks simple from the outside, everything coming together in this 24 by 24 inch block. There's a lot of systems. There are a lot of things to be worked out, and there are a lot of things that you don't see in the finished architecture that are part of that. This is the roof plan. We obviously were given a budget, and we had to stay with the budget. And what we did for the roof was a TPO roof, but we mandated very specific jointing. The membrane couldn't overlap. It had to be heat welded, PVC coated metal. And what it ended up being was a kind of we had a very good subcontractor, and it was a very good installation. For everything that I said about energy efficiency before, this Sky Space wouldn't fall into that category. The donor for this project wanted to have air conditioning in the space. So those 2 ducts that you see behind the bench, they feed air through a slot over the bench. So in the summer in Houston, you can get air conditioning outside. That was a huge technical hurdle to overcome, but to my understanding, we haven't had any condensation form on the bench. The other challenge with the Sky Space was that James Terrell, and this is the only one that's that I know of that has an upper viewing area. Most have the lower viewing area, but this project had an upper viewing area. And what that means from a geometry perspective is that you can't see the top of the roof when you're in the upper viewing area. So the perspective, because you're taller, got much tighter for us in this application. So if you look on the far end, that knife edge had to be tighter than it is typically. And so these are a couple of the details that we did as we started to pull it together. There was a beam that ran down the center of the outline for the roof, and that was fixed. And as we started to go down, all the framing stopped at a certain point. We had a piece of tube still, and then there were these fingers that I'll show you in a second that you just kept adding outrigger and going out as far as you could until you got to the edge of the knife edge. This is an example of the lighting. The lighting's the engine for the project. So these lights there, I think that there were 266 of these lights. They're made in Germany. It's a very specific thing. And because you're in Houston and the heat that you have to deal with, it all had to be ventilated. And so the detailing for the light fixtures was very special. You can see there was a raceway underneath the lights for the conduit. There was venting where air could go through here, and this was also perforated, but it was kind of a project unto itself. This is just an example of some of the conduit wiring diagram for the project. There was a lot of controls. And what also was interesting about this project is it was next to the music school, and they wanted to have amplification inside the space. So this is also the only Sky Space that has speakers in it. And it's a company called Amina that makes a speaker that can be plastered over and it reverberates inside the wall. So it was did a lot of things. This was the first time that they took all the protection off, and we saw the roof kind of in its place. This is an image of the frame. There was quite a bit of concrete and a spread footing that was down below the frame. This is from the side, and you can see some of the penetrations for the ductwork into the wall for the concrete. We had a great concrete subcontractor on the project. And so all of those projects I did with Tom Phifer. And in this project, I started with Tom, and then we worked together, but I'm still finishing this project up. It's a house in Madison, Wisconsin, that is for a couple. They're in their 30s, and they are one's a professor, and they're great people. But they bought a piece of property in Madison, Wisconsin, in this very established neighborhood, and there's a Louis Sullivan house that's right down the street that's incredible, and they asked us to start designing the house. And it's funny, as we started the project, we started with 2 simple blocks, planning blocks for the house. And as we started to get further along, it didn't make it through the Landmarks Preservation Commission, so we came back with a more landscape type house. So the idea behind the house was that it was very kind of rolling. The brick, we like the orange brick from the Clemson project, so we wound up using reclaimed brick from a textile mill down in South Carolina, and that kind of orange color. We like the finish of it. And so, houses are broken down into bedrooms and living, dining room, study, and we wanted, it's a beautiful landscape. The light in as far as we could into those rooms. So as the building starts to morph into these spaces, it separates on the right-hand side would be the study, and on the left-hand side would be a bedroom. And these kind of courtyards that we've carved in they let light into the space. We also used a certain type of glass that has a slight reflectivity, and it's pretty amazing. It's the beauty of glass, right? You get some reflection, you see into the building a little bit, and even on the right, on the left-hand side, you can see through the house through another window. And these forms are pretty amazing. I think from different angles, it's very intriguing. It's a very intriguing shape. The owner just sent this photo to me yesterday. He just finished the doors, and it's perforated metal. So on one side it's perforated metal, and it's the same perforated pattern that was used on the Maison de Verre. And there's an insect screen on the inside, but the outside is a beautiful thing. So what we're going to try to do is etch the doorknob and paint that black as well. And I haven't seen this yet, but I'm looking forward to it. The wall, we were trying to honor the wall thickness as it wraps around. The inside door is a solid wood door. The outside door that you just saw as a screen door, we have a light in the middle, in between the doors, and that light bleeds light out into the outside space, and we've got the doorbell in between the doors. So I'm looking forward to getting the picture when the light's on. This is an inside shot. We had a very competent contractor on the project, and there's actually base molding at the bottom of the wall. It's just, I think it was done with a material that could blend in with the sheetrock, so it looks completely seamless, and there's like a 1/16 of an inch gap at the base of the wall. We used knotty maple that didn't have mineral streaks, which was difficult to find, but we also, had to deal with certain practical constraints like kitchen exhaust. So at the back of the kitchen, that kind of shaped piece is the kitchen exhaust for the house. And I was talking with you, Charles, about this earlier, but the skylights, this house has kind of your standard 3-foot skylight, and it lets an amazing amount of light into the space. This is the study. Given the shape of the house, we had to do a square table inside the study that was 12 feet by 12 feet. And this is a picture of the ceiling going to the bathroom. And of all the projects you saw earlier that were on a grid and very structured, this house, we just kind of went with what felt the best. And you get these kind of weird relationships between wall and ceiling with the project. And this is a shot of the millworker's jig for the sill plates for the house. He fabricated the sill plates at the same time that the foundation was being poured. And they weren't exact, but they were close enough that it may have been a ½ an inch difference between the sill plates and the concrete wall. This is the plan. We did this AutoCAD plan and we gave it to the concrete subcontractor, and he took that information and basically made his forms from that. And so when I worked on the James Turrell project, he had a lighting artist who basically did the light installations for him. He specified the product, he did the dimming, he's kind of a master of light. And he's an artist in his own right, and he's doing great work. And I teamed up with him, Matthew Schreiber, to do a project down in DC, which is an underpass. And he works primarily with lasers. And he does these kind of amazing installations with shapes that are formed out of lasers. He's got the best holographic studio, I think, or the second best in the world. And so when we started working on the project, I was expecting a very high-end light fixture to be done, but he wanted to use neon. I think after working with LED fixtures and working with these kind of incredibly complex things, he really thought for this project that we should go with neon. And after you start thinking about it, it's a beautiful material. It's gas in a tube. And we kind of did our research, and the 2 elemental neon lights are red and blue. Blue's argon gas and red's neon gas. And we wanted to create, so the project or the competition was to do kind of a light installation or an art installation inside of some underpasses in Washington, D.C. And so we did one that was blue with argon gas and one that was red with neon gas. As part of the frames, there were restrictions that you couldn't touch the metal, you couldn't. Amtrak owned the underpass and the city of Washington owned the sidewalk, so it all had to be demountable. So what we did was kind of come up with a wood frame for these lights. This is the red, and I think what's interesting is we kind of turned the condition from being a dark experience as you go through the underpasses, to being kind of a perceptual thing. And we didn't win the competition. We came in top 3, but I think it would have been a great project in Washington, D.C. And it would have been super simple. I mean, I think the replacement and maintenance of it would have been easy. So I live in Bed-Stuy. And this is a mural that was done down the street from my house. Biggie Smalls, and some of the work that I've been doing is based. I'm doing a lot of work for friends, and a lot of the work's based in this neighborhood. And it's a very dynamic place because it's kind of the birthplace of hip hop. There was a lot of crime in Bed-Stuy, still is crime in Bed-Stuy, but there's a lot of money coming into Bed-Stuy and a lot of development happening in Bed-Stuy. People may know Williamsburg. I think it's starting to merge into this neighborhood, and there's a push from another. It's coming from different angles. So interesting things are happening in Bed-Stuy. And a project I'm doing for one of my dear friends is he's got a brownstone, a 2-story brownstone, in actually maybe 5 blocks from me. And he wants to maximize the FAR that's available. So the kind of hatched area is, we're doubling the area of his house, essentially. And we started construction about 2 weeks ago. And it's interesting because it was a single family house, and what we're doing is converting it into a 2-family house. And on the left-hand side is the rental unit, which would be a 1-bedroom apartment. And his plan is when he retires, he's going to live in this unit and then rent out the space above. This is the 2nd and 3rd floor, and it's an interesting architectural problem because he's got 4 kids, and I think he's planning on the 5th. Everyone gets a bedroom, or everyone wants a bedroom. So when he told me he was going to have the 5th kid, I had to change the top plan. But the plan on the right-hand side is completely open. It'll be a much better living space for them. And then on the left-hand side, it's a challenge because he's got a 16-foot brownstone. Most brownstones are in the 18 to 20-foot width range. And the constraint is that if it's 16 feet wide, by code, you can't get 2 bedrooms side by side on the ends, and you can't get the right to light. So it's a challenging thing. But we're going to have to, now that he's planning to have another child, add a bathroom here or add another bedroom on this floor, which is already in the works. This is some of the demolition that's starting to occur. It's also interesting, when he bought the house, it had illegal extensions on the back of it, 2 illegal extensions that were done back to back. And that's how it works. Sometimes you have to correct other people's mistakes. This is another interesting project that I'm working on. We're okay on time, I think. It's for a landscape architecture firm in Brooklyn that's doing large projects. They're doing projects in Austin, Texas, that are 12 blocks long, and they did a large park in Brooklyn, and they're doing a large park in St. Louis, and their office is expanding. So they were on the 11th floor of a building, and now they're moving up to the 12th floor. So I'm helping them do the design for the new space. And what's interesting about this, what's interesting about the guy who owns the company is that he loves to cook. So what he wants to do is create a kitchen where he can bake bread. He can have clients come, he can make food for them, and they do business. He wants to do it for his staff. And I've never really heard of it before. It caught me by surprise. But it kind of made me think back to the Clemson project. And, you know, like, there's ways of doing business that aren't sitting at your desk looking at your computer. You know, it's a very unique thing. We've got some hurdles to overcome, but I think it's an interesting, it's his only requirement, is that we have a stove that he can bake bread in. It's an old concrete building, so just trying to work through the systems. And this is it. I'll leave with this. This was one of the first projects I did. It's an office building in Washington, D.C. and shingled glass. I love the project. And you know, I mean, my goal is to try to make people feel something, and you know, at the same time, I want to try to learn something about myself as I'm doing the architecture. So that's it. Thank you. I left a little bit of time, so if anybody has any questions.
I think we've got about 10 to 12 minutes for questions and conversation. I'll lead off. This is a really appropriate image to show in this building, because you said it's an old concrete building. You're stripping the enclosure off and flattening it?
This is a project that I did with Tom Phifer. I just added it at the end, but this is a project I did with Tom Phifer 12 years ago.
Oh, God, I thought this was the project that you
Yeah, no. I'd love to do it again. Yeah.
What was the material of the underside of the Rice project? How did you maintain that ultra flat ceiling?
Outside or inside?
The Caddell project.
Oh, the underside of the ceiling is plaster. Is plaster. And it's not completely flat. And James Turrell allows it to not be completely flat, so that the biggest thing when you don't have a drip edge, he allows, it's micro detailing, but he allows a little bit of a roll on the knife edge, but he allows you to go up slightly on the underside so that water doesn't wrap around and run horizontally along the edge of the roof. It's a micro detail that you never pick up on, but the underside of the roof is actually sloped, or the soffit's sloped a little bit.
Can you kind of explain the process of working with development project from just with conceptual sketching models and you've got to develop a geometry, structure, technical approach? Was it, you know, if you could just sort of speak more to that collaboration, I think it's really, especially within the context of this series, which is unconventional practice, right, where an architect and artist are working with collaboration.
So this is his 72nd Sky Space, right? And he works with different architects as it comes and goes. But he's the artist, so he sets the geometry. He basically creates the envelope, and that's it. You know, I mean, that's what he says. He says, don't screw it up. After that point, you know, and so he goes away for a period of time. And I made a trip out to Flagstaff to show him the project, maybe after we finished DD with Rice, and he liked everything about it. And then he came out during construction one time because it wasn't. He's busy. He was doing a retrospective at 3 museums around the country, so his plate was full. But you know, Rice at a certain point was like, we need to get him to come. Just to make sure that this is all going to be good. So he came one time during construction, and then he came at the very end. And when I say at the very end, he came before it was completed, and his only comment was that he wanted the knife edge thinner. So we ground down the edge a little bit. But it was a still plate, so we just ground it down a little bit more. And The bench.
Yeah.
It's funny, that was one of his only, it's Texas pink granite. And when we met in Flagstaff, we were looking for more of a we thought it should be like a gray monotone kind of thing. And he didn't want to do that. He thought that the colors reminded him of a 57 Chevy. That's what for some reason, that was the imagery that flashed in his mind. And we wound up going with the Texas pink. We detailed it as kind of simply as possible. You know, I mean, it was very minimal. But he's an interesting guy like that. He's not fixed on like super minimal stuff. He's a very creative mind.
I have another question. So when did you graduate from there?
I finished Georgia Tech in '96,
96.
just before the Olympics.
What can you sort of say to our alums about the education at Georgia Tech, our current students coming from about the education at Georgia Tech and what they might experience as they go out into the world based on your
I think the one thing that struck me flying down here today, I was just thinking about it, is, you know, I've been around architecture schools, different architecture schools, and I've thought about my experience at Georgia Tech. And I guess it just never dawned on me on how much the professors cared about me or cared about students' ideas. But now that I see it as a third party, it really touches my heart to see professors defend or you know, take the time to really think about what students are, their ideas. And I remember Charles was like that when I was in school, and you just think that that's the way it's always going to be very nurturing, but you start to appreciate it when you see it from the outside looking in a little bit.
I was just winging it.
But your questions, what advice would I give to somebody starting out? You know, I think I got pretty lucky. I think you've got to find somebody that you believe in and you want to work with when you start out. And you got to trust that when you're working with that firm that you're making the right decisions. And I think you've got to buy into that for a certain period of time. But then I do think that there comes a point in your career where you decide to do your own thing. And I think that that's a natural process as well. So the longer I'm out of school, the less advice I think you can give somebody as a prescriptive thing to do once they leave school, because there's so many paths that you can take. And I see people out in the profession that took a completely different path than me. And I think it's pretty interesting. Quite honestly, I just think architecture's weird in that you find your own way through the world, and you hopefully you meet good people, and that forms your values and what you do. And you're probably going to meet a few people who aren't positive, and that forms where you go to. So I think architecture is a little bit about curiosity and a little bit about experience.
I think that captures it really well because, you know, schools don't realize how varied paths can be. You think there's a kind of model, like if you're going towards that model, you're sitting in an office and going to be designing something, and you don't realize the kind of extreme explosion of vectors in terms of career paths and sort of expertise you can take. And it's nice to do that.
I mean, the only advice I would give is that if you start a project, try to finish it if you can. I think it's important. I think it's important to be there when it's over. That would probably be the best advice I could give, because I think that that's one thing I've done. I try to do it with the projects. Like there's a few projects that I'm finishing for Tom now that if I take something on, I want to make that commitment. I want to be there at the end.
One thing that's obvious is that you spend a lot of time on job sites.
Yeah.
And you must love construction just in general. But could you just say, your experience
they don't teach it very much in school, and I think you got to get it trial by fire a little bit. I think that's the only way. I mean, the first projects I did, I didn't have very much experience in the field, but I just kind of went out and said, we got to do it this way, you know what I mean? You know, and you've got to fight for it, but at the same time, construction's about not always winning. I mean, sometimes you lose to win later, and you got to know when to win, when to lose, when to call it a draw, and you know, sometimes it's hard when the gun's to your head to like say that it's got to be a certain way, but if it's a good building, it lasts for a long time, you know. Thank you.